Good afternoon, Judge Tammy Bernstein. We are beginning our annual planning meeting and the sentencing guidelines review, so calling the meeting to order. I'll pass over to Executive Director Bergstrom to get us started.
Great, thank you, Judge, and good afternoon, everyone. First, let me just note that it appears that remotely we have District Attorney Sunday and Judge Tucker, trying to see if there's any other commission members that are joining us remotely. Okay, and Judge Tucker and DA Sunday, could you just confirm that you can hear us?
Yes, this is Judge Tucker. I could hear you, and I did hear Judge Bernstein.
Yeah, I'm
great.
I'm
good
here
afternoon,
and I can
Judge.
hear
Thank you.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you, DA. Thank you. Appreciate it. And I see Diane Shoup. Dr. Shoup is on from a remote location.
Yes.
Near the Center of Power in Harrisburg, I believe.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. And then we're joined here in the office. Certainly, Matt is here, and he and I will be co-presenting this afternoon. And then we have unit managers, so Ryan Myers, Christy Bundro, Jadine Reese, and our newest manager, recently promoted, Brett Miller, who's now overseeing our research and data analysis unit. So thank you all for being here. We expect that Representative Stevens will join us in a few minutes, as will Judge Daly. I don't know if others.
Mark, just to note that Diana Wooddyke, the DOC, is also.
Oh, okay. Hi, Diana.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, we'll get started. This afternoon's session addresses two topics. So the first is our annual review, where we sort of take a pause to think a little bit more strategically about the work ahead for the commission and some of the major projects we have underway, and answer any kind of questions members might have about that. And then the second is the sentencing guideline review. As you know, we've been working since 2014 on the revision of the sentencing guidelines, but we've really, I think, been much more aggressive in the last year or so, and this will be a pickup from our July policy meeting and continued work on the review of the sentencing guideline proposals. So I'll start with the annual review. You'll see that there's four key topics that I'll cover. First is just an overview of the commission and the status of that. The second, legislative mandates and what we plan to do relative to those over the course of the next year. Then talk about some of the research projects before us, and then any other kind of tasks. So we'll try to go through this at a pretty fast clip, starting with the commission organization and the members. As you know, back in October 1st of 2019, we had a reorganization. Hi, Judge. How you doing? Judge Daly is joining us. We had a reorganization of the commission through amendments to our legislation. And so at that point, all members were appointed or reappointed. So although in the past we've had staggered terms, at this point, all terms start or commence somewhere around October 1st of the year, and this is the 2-year cycle. So notices were sent out to all the appointing authorities a month or two ago, and we've received several appointments to date. So Representative Stevens, Judge Daly, sorry, Judge, the Y flipped off that. Sorry.
I'll take that first.
Judge Tucker, Professor Rago, and DA Sunday have been reappointed, and we're awaiting other appointments. Judge?
I got my notice that I was reappointed by Commonwealth Court.
Oh, great, great. Okay, I haven't received a notice yet, but I look forward to it. That's great. Thank you. So all members continue to serve until either replaced or reappointed. So we're good to go as we move forward, but hopefully we'll get this all in writing from the various appointing authorities and move that along. The next issue is staffing of the commission. We presently have a complement of 24 full-time equivalent positions And the staff is split between or across five units. So the executive and policy unit that involves Matt and Diane and myself, the administrative and financial unit, which is Jay Dean and her staff that are listed. Next is applications and information technology, which Christy heads. Then Brett and the research and data analysis unit, and finally the education and outreach unit. And at this point, we have 3 vacancies. We have 1 vacancy as a education and outreach specialist, which we are interviewing right now, and we are hoping to recruit someone that will help us in our communications area to work in some of those projects. And then we have 2 data analyst positions available, and those interviews, I think, are going to get underway fairly soon this week, so in the next week. So so we hope to fill those pretty quickly. We also have a number of contracts for services. So as you know, Professor Mystic from Duquesne University School of Law is our legal counsel, and at times we will hire law school students to help with legal research. We have our research partnership with Penn State, which works out to a sort of a commitment of $225,000 a year that is used to identify and to bring on board students and faculty to work with the Commission on commission projects. So that's really been, just a really important part of our relationship with Penn State, but our ability to do a lot of the work that we do. At this point, we have 2 postdoc positions and 2 graduate students. We have a number of interns and undergrads that we are involved with. And we're looking at, as we move into the next year, of possibly bringing on some visiting faculty members. We're trying to work that out with the university and with the department so that we can get through this MOU period, which is a 5-year period, and use the resources that we have dedicated for research. And you'll see we have a lot of research projects, so it's good timing for those kind of things. The final area of contract services is IT support. Some of this is provided at no cost. So we have a lot of support through Penn State for IT support here in our University Park office, and then the legislative data processing office provides support for the Harrisburg office. And although we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years moving application development and support in-house, we know that as we're rebuilding SGS Web, the next gen SGS Web, we probably will need to use some outside resources for things like architectural work or architectural design and other kind of project work on that. It's a big undertaking, and we're going to be doing it concurrent with running the current operation. So we expect there will be some contract requirements there outside of staff, but we're really pleased with the decision to move IT application development and support in-house. It's been a really positive thing, and I want to thank Christy for all of her work. And then the third area of staff is just a sort of an update to all of you about our return to work. So, the commission staff has worked through the COVID problems for more than a year now, a year and a half. And initially in March of last year, we moved totally to remote. And relatively speaking, it was a pretty smooth transition. It was jarring to some degree that we weren't here in the office, but we found that it worked out pretty well. We were very productive, remained really productive, and the technology was pretty helpful. Worked out well for us. As things have sort of returned to normal, at least over on campus, except for wearing masks all the time, we wanted to give staff some flexibility because people still have obligations at home with family and so forth because of COVID. We also found that some people just in balancing work and life and everything else, there were some efficiencies in terms of people working from home. And as I said, we've really, I think, expanded and improved in the ways that we can do work and efficiently do work even when people are remote. So we wanted to make sure that we were providing opportunities for people to continue to work either remotely or in a hybrid setting where they're here in the office sometime and then they're working at home, although we do have some people in-house. So at least through the end of the year and possibly into next year, we're going to keep those things on the table, that people can sort of find what the right fit is for them, as long as we're getting our work done and they're able to sort of keep up. So that will be our plan moving forward. We also benefit from a lot of affiliations. Clearly, our key affiliation is with Penn State through our Memorandum of Understanding. That memorandum is for a 5-year period of time, and it expires June of 2023. So we have about 2 years to go. Matt and I are going to be having a meeting with the department head of criminology in the near future, I think on Friday, to start just reviewing that MOU and start preparing for what the next MOU would look like. Any kind of changes we might want to consider. And we're also, I've talked to Professor Mistick and to the Office of General Counsel here at Penn State about a couple of issues just to sort of clean up within the MOU, some things about data exchanges and other things like that, that it seems like this is a good time to review all of that. So that is underway, and I'm guessing in the next year or so we'll be bringing a new MOU back for your review and consideration so that we have that in place for July of 2023. Duquesne University School of Law, we also have an MOU. It is through that I teach a class out at Duquesne fall semesters, and Professor Mistick and students work with the commission on various projects. That MOU expires next June, and so we may look at trying to do a 1-year extension just to get these all lined up in the same way, and then everything starts July 1st of 2023. But that's been going well, and I'm having discussions with Professor Mistick and Professor Rago about continuing that MOU. And then the final MOU is with Villanova University School of Law, and as many of you know, that's the core of that is our sentencing workshop that we do every spring semester. And so we continue to work with Professor Channinson on that and envision continuing that MOU for another 5-year cycle in 2023. So those are the 3 formal partnerships that we have. Certainly the biggest and most complicated one is the Penn State MOU, but the other ones are really important for a couple of reasons. One, it gives us access to sort of the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh areas. So while we are primarily based here in State College and we have the office in Harrisburg, having sort of locations or the ability to meet and work out of the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh areas can be really helpful. And having connections with law schools as well, because our connection here at Penn State is through the criminology department. The second thing as far as affiliations was efforts during the past year to begin to work with the historically Black colleges and universities in Pennsylvania, so Cheyney and Lincoln universities. Faculty members from both of those schools participated in our academic review panel as part of the effort of reviewing the sentencing guidelines. And we're having discussions with them about other things we can do in the future to keep that connection and build a relationship. So we're talking about things like internships or class presentations or research projects, other kind of collaboration. One of the things that the professor from Lincoln University, Professor Babatunde, raised during the academic review panel was what he saw as a need for specialized programs or specific programs that could be used as alternatives to incarceration for African American youth. And so he had some ideas about that. And so I'm working with Judge Tucker and with the professor trying to plan a meeting for next month so that we can at least hear his ideas and see if there's anything that the commission can do to support that. or look for opportunities to work with the courts and with Lincoln University on projects like that. So I think this is just what we committed to a while ago in terms of connecting with those schools, and there's a lot of interest on both sides, so we'll see where it goes. I'll report back to you on that. And then finally, I'll just mention that we have a lot of other collaboration with other schools. Presently, we have some projects that we're working on with faculty at the University of Pittsburgh and at Carnegie Mellon University. In fact, CMU has been like our go-to for probably a decade or more in terms of a lot of really high-level projects. So that's been a great partnership. So a lot of the times we're collaborating on projects. Sometimes we're just providing data or serving as a technical assistance on projects. So it's been a good relationship. So keep going. Move to the budget. Our current appropriation is $2.5 million, and that's been pretty steady for the last several years. This year, we are anticipating that we'll receive $400,000 in JRI funds. We're supposed to get $400,000 for 4 years in a row to help support the rebuild of SGS Web and some other projects. So we're in pretty good shape. Our operating budget right now is probably below $2.5 million because of the cost savings of remote work and some of the other things that have been in place. But if we were fully staffed and we were back in the office, we would probably be exceeding $2.5 million. So the $400,000 funding is really important and necessary to sort of break even on our operations. We do have reserve funds. The first reserve fund we have is from the legislature. It's intended to be a reserve fund so that if a budget isn't passed for an extended period of time, we don't have to close down, which was a real concern years ago when we had a budget impasse. And so we have a fund that's in reserve with $747,000 to cover operating costs for an extended period of time if there would be failure to pass the budget. We have a research reserve fund of $230,000. As I said, annually we commit $225,000 to research projects with the university. So they're work for us, but it's sort of a win-win situation. We're helping to support students and faculty on projects that benefit us. And because of turnover in students, sometimes delays in hiring someone to fill in a position, other things like that, over the last 3 years, we've built up sort of a credit balance where we have not spent all the monies that we have committed to that research partnership. So we keep that separate and available, and that will be the pool of funds that we'll use for the visiting academics. So the idea is our base operations of working with postdocs and grad students and undergrads is basically about $225,000 a year. And this surplus funding that we've committed to and we've kept encumbered will be used to support visiting faculty members for a couple of projects that we're really interested in. And as I said, you'll see some of the research projects we have. We have plenty of research projects that we have to do. So we have those funds available. And then finally, this past year, you'll see we ended the year with a credit balance, and we had a little bit of a balance from that before, from the previous year. So we have a carryover about $350,000. So as I see it, it's sort of a buffer, and in case the JRI funds do not come through, then those would be the replacement funds. So I'll just mention in closing on this part, when we talked about adding additional staff and especially moving the IT services in-house, we were trying to be very sensitive to being able to not only pay for it for year one, but pay for it for out years. And so to some degree, COVID has given us a little bit of a cushion, which has been helpful. But we know that things like JRI funds have been unreliable in the past. So we can't always plan to have them, even though they're in statute. So I think these reserves are helpful to have in place to give you some confidence that we can move forward without going broke. So any questions on any of that, the staffing, the budget, any of the membership issues? All right. Let me hit a couple more things. So here are the legislative mandates. Just a quick update on where we stand and what our mandates are. We've been working on the sentencing guideline revision, so the 8th edition guidelines. I'm hoping that after today and tomorrow's meeting and after the December meeting, we'll be in a position that we can start to think about placing draft guidelines or proposed guidelines out for public hearings. These, as you know, the guidelines we're doing are dramatically different than the previous guidelines. And so we expect there will be a lot of comment, a lot of discussion about it. And so the sooner the better in terms of getting something out for people to start looking at and responding to. So we're going to try to do a lot of work today on the offense gravity score assignments, and we're going to try to continue and package things together for December. So hopefully, if we're not ready in December, we'd be ready in March to have something available for you to approve to take to public hearing. So we anticipate in 2022 having public hearings on the proposed 8th edition guidelines. For the sentence risk assessment instrument, that's been in place for about a year now. Matt and company have started a preliminary evaluation. You know, it's tough to roll out something new during a pandemic. And so, you know, just doing the analysis in terms of, you know, what's happening out there, you know, what is an artifact of just courts being closed down versus people not using the application and so forth. So it's tough to do even an evaluation of this, but we committed to start that process, and that's what we're working on. So Matt will give you a little bit of an update on that tomorrow morning during the policy meeting. Next is resentencing guidelines. You know, these are only a couple of years old. All they do is basically re-up the sentencing guidelines if someone is revoked and back for resentencing on probation violations. But if we're making substantial changes to the sentencing guidelines, we'll have to look at the resentencing guidelines and see what kind of adjustments may be necessary. So there may be Amendment 2 to the resentencing guidelines, and if so, that would be done in tandem with the 8th edition proposals, and so hearings during 2022 on both of those. A while ago, we worked on a model pretrial domestic violence risk assessment tool. Staff and the commission came together and approved recommendations for an instrument called the ODARA out of Ontario. And we're sort of on a holding pattern right now. I think at one of the recent meetings we talked about legislators trying to figure out what the next step should be. You know, COVID, again, has impacted all of this in terms of courts being shut down and what are the next steps for any kind of DV risk assessment tool pre-trial. But we at least, we put together a proposal, and one of the things in the proposal was some changes to the legislation. And so I think a couple meetings ago we discussed, let's have the legislative members review that, sort of figure out what's appropriate within their caucuses and how we move forward. So that's on a holding pattern, just waiting for any kind of legislative action and also for COVID to go away so that we can sort of return to normal operations. Other legislative mandates, we have the state parole guidelines. We've had those underway for quite a while, and we did public hearings on those, I think, 2 years ago, or maybe it was last year. But we had to suspend the movement on the state parole guidelines because the risk assessment instrument we were using from the Department of Corrections and the Parole Board was being changed. It was being changed from the LSIR to an instrument called the Strong R. And so we have been working, Matt and I have been working pretty closely with the Department of Corrections on reviewing this Strong R as they try to determine what kind of factors will be in it, how they validate it, other kind of issues like that. But I think they've made some final decisions on that, and we're hoping over the course of the balance of the year, they'll be ready to move on the strong R, and then we'll be able to build it into our proposed guidelines and take them out for another set of public hearings. So 2022 is going to be a big public hearing year. I guess, mark your calendars. State parole recommitment ranges. Again, if someone is revoked on state parole and they're recommitted to the Department of Corrections, we have draft recommitment ranges. Based on the public hearings, we've had discussions with the parole board about some changes to what we had in place. And so once we have a clear understanding of where the parole guidelines are based on the strong R, we can make those modifications to the recommitment ranges and take all of that to public hearings hopefully next year. And then the final two mandates are not necessarily guidelines, but they are two tasks that we have that we just have to keep in mind in terms of the work that we have to do. The first is the new county certification of compliance linked to JRI 2. We've talked about this a lot in the past year about the data collection side of things and also the certification of compliance. Ryan and his group have been working really closely with counties on improving the reporting to the commission and also reviewing procedures for certification of compliance. And so we've gone through a practice run of this with counties. In fact, two practice runs, I guess, because we've done interim data providing that to judges this year. But the plan is that spring of next year, we will do the first formal certification of counties. And if counties qualify, they will be certified and will report that to PCCD so that they can receive whatever funding PCCD decides is appropriate based on the county probation and parole funds available to them. If they are not certified by the commission, then they will not be eligible for county intermediate punishment funds, and it's a factor that can be taken into account by PCCD for the grant and aid funding. So it's not our decision as far as funding, but it's our decision about certification. So spring of next year will be the first certification, and it will be based on the data reported this year to the commission. And then the final mandate we have is that any time that we do public hearings, anytime we adopt guidelines, we're required to do a correctional population simulation model. So in effect, what's the cost of operations right now under the current guidelines, and what will the change be under the proposed guidelines? And so Brett's done a lot of work on population simulation models, and that and his work with Diane is really at the core of us trying to talk about the impact of changes to the guidelines. So that is something that we have to, build into the mix as we're moving along. So those are our legislative mandates and sort of the game plan for working on those over the course of the next year. Any questions on that?
Yes, Mark.
Yes, Judge.
Yeah, I was just wondering, on the public hearings, is there a mandate or is there a provision somewhere that that we hear from inmates during the public hearings?
No, Judge, there is not. But last year, for the first time, we had hearings with inmates. So we had a Zoom hearing with 5 of the DOC institutions. And we did it particularly, I guess, for 2 reasons. One was because we were having hearings on parole guidelines, and they would be certainly the affected parties. And secondly, as you know, we were coming off of a lot of conversations by the commission about diversity and racial issues. And one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that we were thinking very broadly in terms of public input on anything the commission's doing. And because of Zoom, it gave us the opportunity to actually have inmates participate in hearings. And I think it was a positive experience. I know it was for the inmates and the DOC, the feedback we got was really positive. So I hope that's something we continue to do forward, and not just for parole guidelines, I think for any of the things that we propose. The other thing that I'll mention is we also tried last year when we had those hearings to also go to impacted communities. So, our typical approach was to have public hearings in courthouses or in the judicial center or in, state offices. And last year, for the first time, we went out to community centers and neighborhood centers, and just to try to make sure that we were engaging those communities as well. So I hope we continue to think about that as we move forward with hearings.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judge. So the next overview, as I've been promising, I think 3 times now, is research. And we have a huge research mandate, requirements under statute, whatever you want to call it. And I sort of listed 3 categories that I think we should keep in mind. And this is why we have to invest so heavily in the research that we do, the research partnership with Penn State and the collaboration with other schools. The first is that under our enabling legislation, we're supposed to have a research plan and timetable. And the focus of that is supposed to be to sort of figure out what works. So we're supposed to look at incapacitation, recidivism, and deterrence. And then we're supposed to determine the overall effectiveness of sentences and parole dispositions. So that's been a mandate since year 1 of the commission. And I'm not sure that we've had a comprehensive plan and timetable. We've sort of been ad hoc. So with Brett coming on as manager of that unit and with Matt in place as deputy director overseeing research, this is just a really good opportunity to revisit that, think about our research partnerships and these other collaborations that we have, and really try to come up with a game plan, because this is really fundamental. I mean, we should know what works and for whom, and this is part of that effort. The second thing is we have a very, very, very long list of reports or studies that we're supposed to do for the General Assembly. And this was amped up during JRI 2. But if you look at our enabling legislation, we're supposed to report to the General Assembly on any revisions to the guidelines and the impact of those. We're supposed to report on the funding, implementation, and outcomes of the funding going to counties under JRI 2. So we've been, Ryan is part of the County Adult Probation and Parole Advisory Committee. That's the committee that oversees the funding and distribution of funding. That's the committee that we report our certification to. And so part of our responsibility is then to report to the General Assembly on how that all is working. And so it's an important responsibility. It's a new responsibility. And as I said, next year will be the first year of funding under that protocol. So it'll be important that we keep that in mind in terms of some of the responsibilities we have during the upcoming year. We're supposed to do an evaluation of all of the new DOC programs. I know during our last meeting, DA Sunday talked about, real concern and interest about like what's happening to SIP now that it's the state drug treatment program. What about referrals? Who's getting into it? All of those other kind of things. That's fair game, and it's a responsibility of the commission as part of this DOC program evaluation. And we're supposed to do those in conjunction with the department and with the budget office, because the cost savings through those DOC programs is what drives funding to county probation and parole and to us and to victim services from JRI 2. So this is all sort of connected together. And then generally speaking, we're supposed to do evaluations of the effectiveness and cost benefit of criminal justice programs. So in the past, under our enabling legislation, we had specific requirements to do a boot camp report every other year by February 1st, or a SIP report. Under JRI 2, they listed a pretty long list of programs, and ask us to come up with our own plan, but to make sure that we're doing this. And so when Matt and Brett are thinking about a research plan and timetable, part of that are these reports to the General Assembly and all of the kind of research required. So again, it goes back to that partnership we have and those collaborations we have and the staffing we bring in through the university, just really key partners. And then the final project that I wanted to mention, Representative Stevens has a House resolution that involves, that would require a comprehensive study of violations of the Uniform Firearms Act. We've had a lot of discussions about it. There's other members of the General Assembly that are very interested in just this issue of VUFA and violence and, aspects of COVID, you name it, but trying to get a better handle on how cases move through the system, what's the attrition look like, what are the sentences like, what are the parole or release decisions like, what are the outcomes in terms of reoffending and so forth. So a big comprehensive study. I think it's, I guess it may be considered this fall.
I mean, I thought it was going to be considered in the spring.
Yeah, I mean, for those familiar with the workings of the General Assembly, anything that touches on the subject of firearms tends to draw some attention. And this resolution in particular is, I would have thought, fairly non-controversial, although it came out of committee on a straight party line vote, which is surprising to me. It was moving with other pieces of legislation, which I expected to move on straight party line votes. And so it's sort of tangled up a little bit, I think unnecessarily, but in some of the other firearms issues that are kicking around. And so I've been trying to decouple it from those other pieces of legislation, because I think it is significantly different. I mean, there's no substance to it in terms of a change in the law or anything else like that. But it was really prompted by the data that Mark had provided over the years concerning compliance as it relates to felons who possess firearms. The compliance rates are all over the map, and it got my attention in terms of when I looked at the compliance data. And there was just an article recently this week about what's going on in many of our first, second, and third class cities and firearms crimes. And so my thought was to have us take a deep dive into it and really try to look under the hood and see what's going on across the Commonwealth, and see if we can pick up on any meaningful information that might be helpful moving forward. So I'm hoping it moves in the fall. I've had some conversations with the Majority Leader's office, and they don't quarrel with this resolution at all. It's really more of what will other members of the General Assembly, want to do if this starts moving. And so that's the challenge.
Yeah, this is one of those things where it sort of reminds me of like the study we did of mandatory minimums, which was just a huge comprehensive study, but it was, and at the time, you weren't sure if there was going to be any kind of reaction, but we have gone back to that study, and a lot of other people have over the years, and there was just a ton of value in that investment. And so whether the resolution passes or not, I think it's in the notebook for the meeting, but it really is a comprehensive review of just firearms, like just understanding what's going on. And like with everything else, like what are the best practices? Like what should we be doing to try to reduce, harm and things like that? And also, interestingly, and this is connected to just the background on the resolution, the United States Sentencing Commission does all kinds of research, but they did research on firearms violence and recidivism. And they found, substantially higher recidivism rate for offenses involving firearms. And so it's one of those things that if you're trying to reduce crime, and trying to deal with it now, but also reduce it in the future, it makes a lot of sense to look at these and try to figure out what the right thing to do is, right? And so anyhow, I think it's just a really, it's well thought out, and I think even if the resolution doesn't pass, I think the commission should look at the resolution and see if we just do it on our own, because it fits a lot of these other categories. And I think it would help the General Assembly, and I think it would just be a worthwhile study.
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, I was in one of my Democratic colleagues' districts in West Philadelphia, and ironically, sadly enough, he's very interested in addressing gun violence, and he's a supporter of this. But while we were in his district, we were there talking about the gun violence that is exploding in his district. And I guess over the weekend, somebody won some money at a casino and put that on social media, promptly got kidnapped, thrown in the back of a car. That person went on social media, said that they knew who did it and they were going to retaliate. And there's been a shooting for, I think it's now 5 straight days, including yesterday while I was in the district, a block away, someone got shot in the head. And so, it's certainly an issue, particularly down in the Southeast. I mean, we see it all the time. Judge Tucker, I'm sure you see it. It's on the nightly news and on, above the fold on the paper almost every day anymore with the city. So just trying to better understand what's going on there, I think would be really helpful.
Thanks. Any other comments on the research projects?
I have a quick
Yes,
question.
Judge.
Just on the DOC programs, you said they gave you a finite listing of what they're talking about, they want you to take a look at, correct? And then when it says that evaluations and effectiveness and cost benefit of criminal justice programs, is there a list of those, or those?
There are some specifically listed, and then there's language that would allow us to study any kind of program or process in place, I think. So it's really, again, it's about best practices. It's trying to sort of figure out what works and what doesn't. I think, if you think about just JRI 2 and all the changes that have occurred with JRI 2, one of the things is to sort of test it to make sure it's working. And so by us planning now with that, you have sort of baseline information from recent practices, and then you can look at these changes that have been made, like with SIP, switching it over to State Drug Treatment Program. And the question is it better or worse? Did we improve on something that was pretty good to start with, or did we create a problem? So it's looking at that. I guess if I was going to separate it out, the DOC program one, really looked specifically at 4 or 5 specific DOC programs, whereas the evaluations, you could think of not only like county programs, but just more generally any kind of criminal justice processes. So it's pretty broad language.
That's what I was wondering, the language. Did they guide you towards them, or they broad
they guided us towards some specifics. One of the things that I think is noticeable about it, that is cost benefit, because we've talked about that before, that we do a lot of studies of recidivism and other things like that, but trying to get a handle on the cost of a program and whether the benefit you're deriving from it is worth the investment is one of the things that it's tough to do, but it's really good research. So that gives us an opportunity to try to do some stuff in that area. Sure. Anything else? So that's the research, and then we have other stuff to do. So at the top is that SGS Web Next Gen application development. So we have an application that served us well. We collect a lot of really good detailed data. We're working really hard to improve reporting to us using that application, but we need to do a rebuild, and the best time to do a rebuild is when we're rebuilding the guidelines, so that we're building it around this sort of new process. And if you just think about all of the stuff we're required to do, sentencing guidelines, resentencing guidelines, parole, recommitment, risk assessment, maybe some pre-trial stuff, lots of stuff, plus the internals of some of these programs, like at DOC or at the county level. There's just lots of things that, 20 years ago we weren't involved in, and now it's like central to what we're doing. And so the application should really track that. We should think in terms of almost like a case management system, or at least in a sense of a modular system where we have a sentencing module that flows into a parole module or a resentencing module, so that we have good information that we can use to sort of understand things. The other thing that we really benefited from with the sentencing guidelines was our relationship with the AOPC and our data exchange with Common Pleas Case Management System. That's just, that using JNet and harvesting information from CPCMS is just like a multiplier in terms of how important the data is that we collect and how connected it is. And what we have to do is that same thing when we're working on the parole side. So the Department of Corrections, which now oversees community corrections and parole operations, not parole decision-making, but parole operations, is building a new application called Chapter, sort of the CPCMS for DOC. And so we have had conversations with them about how do we exchange data with that system so that we can automate our parole guidelines and collect information on programs and releases and all kinds of other things that are important for this kind of analysis. So Christy has her work cut out for her, but it's a really exciting time because this is like building a new application that could really help us way into the future, and it's well past time. So I'm glad we have a solid financial base to do it. I'm glad Christy and her team are on board, and I'm glad that we've had the experience of 20 or 30 years of doing this kind of stuff, that we know, what we're looking for. So exciting time ahead. So all we need are new guidelines. So just once you do that, we're good to go. So again, the application that we're talking about would not only include sentencing guidelines, but those other guidelines we're doing. And then there's one other little piece of information in JRI 2 that was a requirement to us that we sort of have to figure out what the fit is, or how we build this in. But we're supposed to be providing interactive information to the court on risk and recidivism information. Now, we do provide risk information through our application right now, so we have to make sure that continues to be part of what we produce for courts with sentencing guidelines. But trying to have some interactive information on recidivism, that gets down to the specific kind of case you're looking at. Is this a young male? Is this a firearms offense? Is this a drug-dependent person? There's a lot of those kind of things. So when we talk about evaluations like cost-benefit analysis, that's part of that recidivism information that we're probably going to be looking for. And we just have to figure out how we capture this, that it's targeted enough for our purposes, and then how we make that available to judges and others to use it prior to sentencing. So a lot of work. Part of what we do with SGS Web could be part of that, but there's other things that we're talking about that I'll get to that may contribute to that as well. So lots of work ahead. The next thing, as far as other tasks, is the communications plan. Representative Stevens and Judge Bernstein talked about this over the last year or two, and we've had some work done on trying to figure out how we can better develop a communications plan and have the resources in-house to manage that, or contract for that kind of stuff. And as with everything else, COVID sort of got in the way of this, but we have been making progress in a lot of specific areas, sometimes because of COVID. So certainly, Matt's been reporting on the website, and this rebuilding of the website we've partnered with the university on. And Matt will be reporting on that tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. So you'll get a little bit of an insight into where things stand. And it's not far away. We're talking weeks or months. Months? 8 months? I don't know. We're not the ones who decide this, I guess. But a lot of the work's done. It's just a matter of getting it deployed. But you'll see the refresh website. It's really refreshing, and I think really helpful and timely. And so that's part of the communications plan. Another part is what we already provide, but we need a different vehicle for, and that's what we call online data. If you go to our website, you're able to prepare sort of at request specific reports, judge-specific reports, sentencing reports, conformity, duration of sentence, all kinds of details. The problem is the application we use to build that, called SAS-BI, is broken and can't be fixed. And so we've been looking at other applications, and I think we're all in line with moving over to a thing called Power BI, which would allow us to generate reports like that, but more for in-office use, not for like general distribution. But the power of Power BI is they're really good with things like infographics. So we could make available on the website a lot of information in sort of a more user-friendly kind of environment. And then if people want the sort of static reports like we've been generating through SAS-BI, we can have an in-house sort of app to do that, and then we could just provide those upon request. Not perfect, but it's that's sort of what it looks like. But then we're also looking at how do we redo the annual report? How do we do other things to make information available to the public? So that's all part of a communications plan. Social media, we're like dinosaurs. We're not there. So we're trying to sort of figure out what's a responsible and sort of initial step to engage in social media. Maybe more as a recipient and being aware of what's going on, and not so much pushing information, but depending on, are we doing public hearings? Are there issues that we're putting out there? Just having some kind of role in someone that has the ability to at least maintain that a bit. And then other media, you've seen that we've started live streaming. We have our YouTube channel. Ryan's group does the monthly updates every month. So there's a lot of efforts to improve just the publications, the information we're putting out. And so one of the things we hope to do in the near future is add a person to Ryan's staff, another education outreach specialist, but someone with a real focus on communications, like media, marketing, that kind of stuff. And we've had some interviews already, really exciting about some of the opportunities there. So I'm hoping we can close the deal in the next month or so, bring someone on board and help us work through some of those things. So it's sort of an incremental approach to starting to really focus on communications, especially when we're trying to put out a new website and other things like that. It might be fresh, but it won't be fresh for long if we don't do anything with it. So we need someone to be able to maintain it and keep it fresh. The final thing I just wanted to mention, and this is, I don't know if it's another task, but it may be a task to meet quarterly, but one of the things I wanted to just put on your radar is that that tomorrow, and then certainly during December, we'll be voting on the meeting schedule for next year. And a couple of things to think about. One is we've moved to, we're trying to sort of go remote right now, or hybrid right now, where we're, some of us here and some of us are remote. Is that sort of the way we want to proceed, that we always have both options available? I think that can be really helpful. I think we're getting, savvy enough to be able to sort of manage this, so that might be a worthwhile thing. I think certainly, Zoom webinar is way better than teleconference. So if you're not going to be in the room, there's other options. So we want to think about that. We want to think about the structure of the meetings. Right now, historically we've done the Wednesday evening dinner meeting where we'd have a speaker or other kind of stuff, opportunities to discuss things, and then Thursday morning the policy meeting, and then the commission meeting. We sort of reserve Wednesday afternoons for things like this or for public hearings. So there's sort of a commitment of a 2-day, every 3 months kind of cycle. If that's working for everyone, I think it works well for staff in terms of preparing materials and having sort of a placeholder for public hearings. I mean, we always have to have more hearings, but at least you'd have always one right before the commission meeting. So I just wanted to sort of raise that, because if there's an interest in changing the structure or the day of the week or other things like that, happy to look into any kind of options you want. But if this is working pretty well, then what we'll try to do for the December meeting is try to figure out what the consensus dates are for next year, and then that would be a voting voting item in December. So I think with that,
Before you leave that?
yeah, sure.
I mean, so just so I'm clear.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that there might be a better alternative, or is it your sense from the staff's perspective that the existing framework works well?
I think it works well for us. By statute, we have to meet quarterly. So if we're meeting quarterly, the question is, is it do we just do it a single day, or is there a benefit to sort of coming in the night before, especially if some people are actually physically going to be there? Is a dinner meeting a good idea? That could be really helpful and productive, especially if you have a speaker in or you have an opportunity to discuss things, because you don't get together that often. But sometimes those things don't work. So we just are sort of checking the temperature to see if this approach that we've been using makes sense. And if we overlay this hybrid approach, might add a little value, even if we keep that same structure.
We're calling it a hybrid approach now, but before COVID, I know there were times people stepped in
Right.
for meetings. So we've always had that option.
We have.
President, correct, this is just a little bit.
Yeah. And it's in our bylaws. We developed bylaws 20 years ago, and we put in, teleconferencing was an okay way to participate in a meeting. And so, now I'm thinking we might want to revisit that just to, update the terminology. But you're right. We've sort of had hybrid available. So this just sort of formalized.
And are you looking for any input on it, or just saying that's something we're going to be talking about?
No, I guess if there were other suggestions, that would be helpful. Otherwise, we'll just sort of plan, sort of stay on course and have Kathy try to identify dates for next year, and locations. The other thing, I guess, that came up this time was, traditionally we've done 3 of the meetings in Harrisburg and 1 meeting up here. Usually the September meeting is here. And that first gives you an opportunity to sort of check us out and check out the office and things up here. And this is also sort of always the annual meeting, so it's a little bit more relaxed. So if that continues to work, we can plan that way. In the past, in the distant past, we would have meetings in other locations, in Philly or Pittsburgh or other counties that it was a little bit more expensive, but it was nice to sort of get out, invite the local bench to have lunch with the commission or dinner with the commission and sort of get some insights from others. Or so if there's other things like that we should be considering, we'd be happy to look into it. But I think more recently we've gotten into that sort of 3 in Harrisburg at the Judicial Center and 1 up here. I guess the other thing I could mention is now that there are the hearing rooms in the Irvis building, we use that for the policy meeting and it's sort of an alternative to the Judicial Center. So that's sort of a minimal kind of thing, but is there a preference as far as a location if we're in Harrisburg? Because, we're a legislative agency. The hearing rooms are right down the hall from our office. That's sort of convenient, but the Judicial Center, that's a big room, and, nice room for having meetings. So anyhow, if you have any suggestions, feel free to let us know. But we'll just sort of stay on course, give you some recommendations in December, and hopefully vote for the schedule for next year.
Mark, is it easier for your staff to have it in Irvis as opposed to across the street?
I don't know. We've only had 1 there. Jadine, do you have a sense of?
It's definitely more convenient.
Yeah.
Because we're right there, and if we need copies,
Right.
we don't have to go try to find the Judicial Center staff. Catering was the same, because they will do it at any location.
Those hearings are really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I know in the past, one of the concerns about meeting in the Capitol complex was you could get bumped because if a committee was going to meet, we were second tier. But I think there's more rooms, and especially when we think about the timing, especially Thursday meetings seem to sort of work pretty well as far as the availability of rooms and that. So
The June meeting is probably the only one where you might run into,
because
but the earlier in the month you are, the less likely you're going to run into that.
Yeah. one of the things we could always consider is, and you're right, we have run into conflicts because of June meetings. One of the options could be to have this meeting in June. In the past, that was a problem because legislative members would have to be there for hearings, but if we have remote access now, it's sort of, you can Zoom into a meeting even if you're stuck in Harrisburg. But anyhow, we're open to any suggestions.
Does anyone have any feelings on whether being in, like, getting to different counties and having an opportunity to interact with the bench, the prosecutors, the defense bar in different counties would be beneficial for the commission members?
I think that it would.
If we had commission members there, so,
Right.
I mean, if we're gonna have 90% of them zooming in, if it's a longer drive for them, I like the idea of being live. I've found when we meet in person, the conversations carry over or after dinner, and I feel like I walk away understanding better, and it just feels like more gets done, or there's more input. The staff, you guys see each other all the time, that's for us. But I think that's a really great idea, if people go. I see benefit to it. I just think, it's like everything else, when you're in it, it seems obvious, but when you remove yourself, when I sit on my own bench, the stuff that you see, and you're like, well, that's JRI too, when I remember it. So I think the more that we can get out and make people understand, or help people to understand, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, we've had some, I think the judge is right in terms of, you need critical mass. But I know it seems especially like in some of the rural counties, northern tier or something like that, it was just, it was a really positive experience in terms of hearing like different views, but also from that court feeling like, hey, the commission came and visited. That was a pretty great thing. And in those areas, you think more regionally, like the administrative district or whatever, and instead of, we could be in a county, but you might invite adjoining counties or something like that, because it is more rural, and they work together a lot because they're, sometimes sharing judges because of conflicts and things like that. So yeah, that was helpful. The other thing we could do is, although, that one thing to do is to do it for commission meetings, you can also do it for the public hearings. Mm-hmm. So when we think about where we're going to hold public hearings, thinking about, spreading them out and purposely trying to see if we can get like a group of members to attend in person so that we can offer that. Because that was often something, like we would do public hearings in a location where it would be a 1 or 2 o'clock meeting, and we would extend an offer to the bench and to the DA and PD to have lunch with us to discuss the proposals, things like that, and then join us for the hearing if they wanted to. If they didn't, at least they had an opportunity to sort of hear what was going on or make suggestions or whatever. So it was, I always found those really helpful and maybe a little bit more approachable, because you're sort of focused on a topic, like here's these guidelines or here's something else that we're looking at. So we can, it looks like we're going to have public hearings next year, so we might have opportunities for doing that.
Yeah.
Are there any challenges in, when you did it before, where you're having the meetings around the state, were there any challenges finding meeting space that worked? And do you foresee that with the whole, if we kept with this hybrid approach where we were giving people the opportunity, I mean, is that an issue in some of the counties?
Actually, that's the one part that I think might be difficult, but I think it's getting better, and I'd have to defer to Ryan and Christy on this. But the positive thing was, if we were going to a county, at the very least, they'd often, make a courtroom available or something like that to like accommodate us. So I think counties went out of their way to find a space to help us out, and it would often be a courtroom or a office building, county office building. One when it gets to the technology side, I can see that being a little bit more difficult just because of all the stuff we're doing just here or another room. So Christy and Ryan, what's your sense on like the live streaming part of it?
Sure, I'd say, this is Ryan for everybody that's joining. I'd say that pre-COVID, it would have probably been pretty problematic to do a Zoom session. Now, 18 months in, most every county seems up to speed when it. So back in March of 2020 in April, a lot of the remote sessions that we were doing, shut down because of bandwidth issues and so forth. But I'd say in just our general meetings with counties and continued virtual presentations, I haven't experienced, and our unit hasn't experienced anything. And to Mark's point, when we've gone out and done presentations or meetings for risk assessment all those years ago now, really welcoming to be in various counties for the public hearing. Certainly, I think that's a benefit from a staff perspective.
Christy, any other thoughts?
I think it have to coordinate everything and make sure everything's working, so it's a little bit more. Everybody's used to it now, so.
Yeah.
You have your higher ed partners too, plus you're never that far from a Penn State campus.
That's right. And you're absolutely right. Now the thing is, sometimes the most difficult site we found was like a Penn State campus because they're like using the classrooms all the time. So it was a little bit more difficult. You'd think it would be easy,
Colleges.
yeah. Well, but here's the thing. One of the discussions we've had with Lincoln University is to use their space. They have a building, I think near Penn. It's I think just off the Schuylkill, and they've sort of offered to make that available for us, a space there for a public hearing or for other kind of meetings. So that's certainly something we'd want to take advantage of. And we've talked in the past to community centers, things like that. So I think that could be part of the mix as well.
Mark, if I could just.
Sure,
one
please.
Piece of information for the members to consider. Going back to the Urbis room for a moment, we've done now 4 or 5 legislative lunch and learns there, and obviously had the special policy meeting. I would just raise that for your consideration. It's a smaller room from a public attendance standpoint, and in the past, at our judicial center meetings, we've had a lot of public attendance. I know the landscape's different now. We have live streaming and so forth, but should you have public wanting to physically attend your meetings, that is a smaller room, at least from that.
Wait, which is the smaller room?
The Urbis hearing rooms are smaller than the judicial center room where we would have the meeting previously. The public.
You mean this is the physical space, but there's more chairs in the hearing room. Like for the public, right?
In my recollection, Chair, last time, we've had some pretty big public attendance in the judicial center where we brought in 40 or more chairs. I'm not sure that the hearing room would accommodate that the same way, and it's a pretty tight room. Having been in there certainly is about that many chairs, but it just seems that it might be smaller. If you think about all members being present around the top, and you have some staff there like we have today. If you have others that are attending, we have 10 people right now attending from other agencies, just remote today. I just saying it might present an issue there.
There is also a overflow room next door that has a big screen and seating for that hearing room.
Diane, are you talking about it in the Urbis building?
Yes, in the Urbis building.
Okay,